right? Great. All right. Well, thanks for coming, and let's just get right into it, shall we? Okay, great. All right, Beavers in the City, exploring public perceptions and opportunities for coexistence. My name is Matthew Guziejka, as said by Brian. Thank you very much. My chair and advisor is Hee-Jun Chung of the Geography Department. Christina Friedel is a co-advisor from the Portland Community College Geography. She's the chair over there. And Melissa Hefner works in the Environmental Science Management Department. Um, and they've been a really great committee to have, honestly. So, introductions. All right, let's get into it. Beavers demonstrate synergization, which was a term that I learned fairly recently from a paper published out of Arizona State. And it's basically the idea that wildlife is adapting to urban areas. You think of birds, you think of squirrels and things like that. And beavers are starting to do that same thing. You hear about them living in culverts and ditches and things like that. And conflicts can arise when beavers disrupt infrastructure, flood trails, or damage property. But coexistence can also occur when beavers are considered when restoration projects take place in urban areas where there are waterways and beavers are known to be present. So this study really examines the public perceptions of urban beavers in the Tualatin River Watershed, which is in the Portland metro area, um, through a social survey. And I am obviously located here in Oregon. So we have some basic research questions that we're trying to ask here. How does the participants' ecological knowledge influence their preferences for beaver management, their perceptions of how beavers impact the local area, both ecologically and socially, and how does that affect what they think about beavers being legally protected? And then what are the public perceptions of urban beavers across social and ecological dimensions? And then I have some qualitative insights, which are contrasting views on beaver presence in these different areas that we did the survey. And then lastly, it's what are the public's preferred coexistence strategies for managing urban beaver populations? And how do those preferences vary by socio-demographic and spatial variables? So why is this important? Well, substantial research on beaver ecology, habitat engineering, and fewer studies have focused on perceptions and even less so of residents' perceptions of beavers in urban areas. Most perception studies are done in Europe and in the UK. There's very few in the United States. And we just want to know how people who live and use these trails and these areas where there are beavers, like what do they think about the beavers and the impacts? So in Oregon, we have something that just passed last year called the Beaver Bill. And Oregon has seen some historic beaver fluctuations. We have the beaver on the state flag for various reasons because it is a huge part of our identity as a state. But the House Bill 3464, also known as the Beaver Bill, reclassified beavers from predators, if you could believe it or not, to fur bearers. So effectively, this makes landowners seek permits to prioritize non-lethal methods before considering lethal removal of beavers on private lands. And we have this little tiny flow chart down here on the bottom that shows kind of like a mental map of how people think about beavers. And this was done by Charnley et al. In 2020. And it's human or beaver populations increase, right? Encounters increase. And then undesirable impacts of beavers and dams increase. So you're getting this conflict. Human tolerance decreases because there is conflict. So demand for acceptability and control measures increase. So you're getting this beaver human conflict, because there isn't a lot of coexistence in practice, and then that's demanding on local agencies to do something about it. So I call this Baseline Beaver, and this is a great paper, um, fairly new. The good, the bad, the unseen, wild mammals encounter influence, preferences of residents across social demographic gradients. And I believe this paper was written and published in Germany. And what this is showing is beavers on the right-hand side, you can see this chart diagram. Beavers are rarely encountered. Only 23% of the participants who took the survey had seen one in their residential area. But despite this, they were listed as more often liked than disliked with a preference score of 118. So what this means is the beaver is a rare animal on a perception scale. They are one of the animals that have the fewest encounters, but they're the only animal that has few encounters and is preferred. And if you look at the percentage of the survey participants having encountered the mammal, you can see out of every single animal listed, the beaver is the last. It is the smallest encounter, but it is still preferred. So just generally, people have a great perception of beavers for whatever reason. It could be the cuteness factor, but just going into this, the baseline is people like beavers generally. So jumping into our study, this is our study area. We're located in Northwest Oregon. You can see here on the map. And we decided to do a mixed space use of Chicken Creek, which is the least developed and in a national wildlife refuge. We have Fano Creek, which is an urban parkland, meaning it is just a park in a very urban area. Like, you know, that's the place people go to recreate. It's just surrounded by urban areas. Springville is a mixed use area. It's like that edge of the urban growth boundary. So you have some farmlands and then you have like mass urban development right up to that farmland. And the next slide will show you a little bit of that. And you can see this is the Tualatin River Watershed here. And you can just see how hilly it is and how it just drains into this low gradient basin. And this is where we get a lot of beavers. Okay, so coming up, this is our Chicken Creek site. And you can see this is at the National Wildlife Refuge down here in Tualatin. And you can see this is, you know, fairly natural habitat. And we wanted to take a survey there to see what people thought about beavers in this habitat versus a habitat like this. And this is Fano Creek. This is that highly urbanized area. And you can see it is just surrounded by highways, growth, housing complexes, industrial facilities. And there are beavers there, surprisingly. And then the next site is Springville. In Springville, you can see this is our study site down here. And to the left-hand side of the screen, you can see, okay, we have this urban farm kind of situation overlapping, and this is the extent of the urban growth boundary here in Portland. So we're getting beavers in this area. So the methods we used is we did a Likert scale analysis to assess sentiment on ecological and social impacts, some logistic regressions, violin plots, knowledge level classification based on ecological questions. And we did this with a social survey based on Auster unraveling perceptions of Eurasian beavers. He was very helpful when we emailed him when it came to designing the survey. Michael Kracha in our lab was the one who did design the survey and distribute it with Heejun Chung, the advisor. And we did that by surveying flyers, QR codes, public signage like you see here. And we put these out for 4 months from August to December. The National River Wildlife Refuge, we had limited distribution there just because of laws and regulations. But some of the survey topics that we focused on was demographics. And the ones we focused on were age, gender, political views, and education, perceived impacts ecologically and socially, management preferences. We defined coexistence versus non-coexistence methods. And then again, that knowledge assessment on ecological knowledge. So just some quick hard-hitting stats here. The greens represent the most, the orange represents the middle, and the blue is the least. So basically what you're seeing here is we have an older population that is very liberal, mostly female, barely, and at least have a bachelor's degree. So educated, liberal population is what we're working with. This is the spatial aspect, and we're looking at proximity to green space, proximity to specific green spaces, like our survey sites, how long they've lived there, and how far they live from a watercourse. So we're wondering, does living on or near a watercourse affect their perceptions of beavers? Are they more worried about their housing, et cetera, et cetera? So I'm going to go have these research questions sprinkled throughout to kind of keep us familiar with the idea of the paper. How does participants' ecological knowledge influence their preferences for beaver management? And what we have here is these are the ecological knowledge questions, and they had to get all 3 correct for them to be considered knowledgeable. And if they missed one, they were considered less knowledgeable. And that's how we kind of split up that divide. So where do beavers live? In a lodge. What do beavers eat? Vegetation, and what are some examples or clues that tell you a beaver is present in the area? And the best example of that is chewed sticks, because we do have flooding on there, which a lot of people picked, but the areas can flood for other reasons, not just beavers, but nothing else is chewing on sticks, right? And we get this beautiful stat, which is almost 50-50, where more people are knowledgeable, but only by a couple percentage points, which is really great when we are looking into the stats later on. So looking at that, we said, okay, how does that affect these different variables? And the greens are the ecological variables and the blues are the social variables. And we have a Likert scale, 1 to 5, negative to positive, somewhat positive, and neutral in the middle. So we're looking at how do they affect wildlife, plants, and ecology, water and flooding, soil and ground stability, and their overall effect on the area. And then we're looking at how do they affect economics, education, health and welfare as it relates to humans, not other animals, recreation and leisure, and then agricultural and grazing. So we mapped all that out. And we can see that dashed line on the bottom is the significance of the p-value significance. And we found that ecological knowledge specifically only affects how beavers affect wildlife, plants, and ecology, and waterways and flooding. So what this showed is people with more ecological knowledge had a significant impact on their views on those two factors, meaning that they viewed it in a more positive way, actually. The other ones came up not significant. So then we said, okay, how does this affect their coexistence? Do more ecological knowledge mean more coexistence and vice versa? And we found that, yeah, slightly, but we also found that more knowledgeable also meant more non-coexistence. So there was no significance in this finding. This is merely just like a trend or just a stat to be seen that, sure, knowledge does lead to a greater increase of coexistence, but not in anything significant that we found in our survey. And then when we look at legal protection, overwhelmingly, even if you look at limited and strong combined, that makes up a huge majority of it despite the knowledge level. And you can see 1 percentage point off between the two groups, but those are both also overwhelmingly positive for strong legal protection. So despite knowledge levels, people want the beavers protected in some capacity. This is just a quick review of everything I just discussed. I'm just going to breeze over this because, you know, I've said it all. And then we're going to jump into question 2. What are the public perceptions of urban beavers across social and ecological dimensions? Not looking at ecological knowledge. So this is just how does Bob, Jim, and Terry think about beavers in these areas and how do they affect stuff? There's no scale of knowledge on this one. And again, same variables. And what we did is we mapped it out into a little chart. And that's this chart. And you can see positive is purple, somewhat positive, neutral, and negative. And what you can see here is positive overwhelmingly is wildlife, plants, and ecology. So people think that they have a very great impact in a positive way on wildlife, plants, and ecology. And the second highest one is beavers' overall impact on the area. And that is not just ecological, that is both social and ecological. So people think beavers have a great impact on the area if they're present. But what you can see looking here as a trend is there is more neutral viewpoints in that social versus that ecological is more overwhelmingly positive. And we're going to see that again right here. We're seeing ecological, very, very positive. The neutral is at 17%, and then the social neutral is at 35%, and the positive is still the majority, but there's more unknowns about how beavers affect those social variables, which is interesting. But ecologically, people are like, oh yeah, they're doing great work. We love the beavers. And then we're going to jump into violin plots. And for some, including myself, they're not the most intuitive, so I'll do the best I can to try to explain the results from these violin plots. And what we're looking at is the distribution of those Likert scale variables 1 through 5 based on political views. So this is the ecological and the social variables, which we had just looked at, those two divisions. And this is how they're being distributed amongst the average participant. So we're seeing the top of the funnel in the top left corner, the political view. When it's at its widest point, that means that's the majority. If there's more distribution along the the x-axis, pardon me, then you'll see there's more maybe uncertainty about that. So if we look at this, if we look at political views, neutral to no answer on the social side, there's a bigger distribution of those answers. But liberals on the ecological side shows it as a majority highly positive. Um, and you can just take a second to kind of look at this, education level, there's more uncertainty about social. Bachelor's degree, graduate and doctorate degree, as far as ecological, it's very, very positive. And you'll just see this trend again, social versus ecological. The ecological stuff is overwhelmingly positive compared to the social, which is a little bit more distributed. And the same goes for the spatial variables. We have distance to green space, distance to water course, residential duration. And you can see, surprisingly, the residential duration on the bottom right corner, people who've lived there for over 10 years, ecologically, they have a very positive perspective. But again, socially, it's a bit more distributed amongst that. And the same with distance to water course. You would think people who live on the water course might be a little bit more apprehensive about having beavers there, and they are on the social level, but the ecological level, you can see that cone towards the top is showing that they are more on the positive side. So that was interesting to kind of see all that. And respondents expressed significantly higher positive perceptions towards beavers, which we had talked about, and the ecological perceptions remained largely positive versus the socials. And liberal respondents, individual with higher education levels, and those living closer to green spaces exhibited stronger positive perceptions, particularly regarding those ecological benefits. So again, just that trend of people know how beavers affect things ecologically, maybe not so much how they affect human health and welfare, which is an interesting thing that can be explored probably later. So these are some qualitative insights. People had the options during the survey to put anything they wanted after any question. They can say why they put something in. They can say why they answered a question a certain way, and that was optional. So I kind of went through that, and I saw this really overwhelming trend between two sites, between Fano Creek and Springville Creek, which is Fano Creek is that highly urbanized area with the industrial complexes, and Springville Creek was the one at the end of the urban growth boundaries. And here are some responses that people had about Fano Creek. Fano Creek Park has lost 50% of its trails to flooding. I love animals, but beaver activity is ruining our trails. It is great for plants and animals, inconvenient for people. I see new trees being chewed down by beaver, and they seem like they are ruining our trail. They can work their magic in more remote locations that need it. And that was the general consensus of that highly urbanized area, right? And we're wondering why that is. Well, we have this red circle for no reason except to show a survey site from 2013. This is our highly urbanized area in Fano Creek. And all these images are provided by USGS Earth Explorer, which I'm sure we're all familiar with. So I pulled whatever I could that had clear imagery for this area. And this highlighted area is what we want to focus on. And what we'll see next is this is from 2014, not a big change. And we're going to jump into 2015 here. And you'll see, okay, still no change. The trail is still visible. 2016, okay, that south end, we are getting a little bit of flooding. And that is from beavers. It's not from anything else. So then let's look at 2017. Okay, it's cleared up. So the flooding is the seasonal ebb and flow in the wintertime. But if we look at 2019, there's a lot of flooding. That whole area in the red, you see that little pond extension to the left of that trail. That bottom right trail is constantly flooded. And the thing to know about this area is this is a Frisbee disc golf course, or it used to be. Recently, the city had just decided to say, it's flooded, we're going to move the golf course and just let the beavers have this area, which is exactly what happened. So that's why you're getting this negative response. And just to kind of understand the scope, I'm going to show you my dogs here. This is that trail, and that's how flooded it is. That's what the vegetation looks like. I was there in a pair of knee-high boots, and I could not walk down that trail. I'd have to use waders. So it is totally not functional anymore. So that's why you're getting the negative response with those people in this particular location. Now, if we look at Springville, it's like the opposite. You know, more wildlife in the area. There's greater variety of wildlife. When the beavers arrived, the surrounding area became greener, lusher, more welcoming to all kinds of wildlife. This person saw Wilson snipe, which they are pretty stoked about. It makes me more excited to explore the area. I enjoy the habitat, the lodges, the changing of seasons. I've seen how dry and brown the areas can be without the increased water the beavers bring, which is great, right? So we have another red circle. And then within that red circle in 2001, we have our study site. This is Springville. This is that urban growth boundary. And there might be a waterway in there. It's really hard to tell. Pardon me. 2006, right? Okay, well, let's jump to 2009. Okay, a little greener. We can start to see a little bit of a waterway there on that northeast corner of that red circle. And again, there's a trail, there's a bridge, all that was built. That's new. Okay, 2010, a little action going on. Not too much has changed. Let's jump to 2012, which is what this is. Now, a clear restoration project is underway at this site. There's power lines that run between these two, so this area will never be developed for housing, but they have this waterway that runs down into Bethany Lake here in Springville. So there is a restoration effort underway for this waterway. And what you'll see is here they are doing some more of it. And if we zoom in, what do we see? Some large woody debris that is being placed here for fish, aquatic invertebrates, we all know the important role that large woody debris plays for many aquatic species. Okay, so if we jump to 2015, we're starting to see a big difference in what it looked like from 2006. You know, we're starting to see some ponds, some build outs, more construction happening on that southwest corner of that red oval down there. And if we jump to 2016, we can see the ponds start to develop more and more. 2018, more on that top right, more on the bottom left. Jump to 2019, this is what it's starting to look like. So really heavily developed ponds on the north end of this image. And then if we jump to 2021, it is very, very different. I mean, look at the amount of water in this area. A lot of storm runoff is being filtered in this area. Beavers are in this area. Birds have increased activity in this area. And look how close these homes are to this area. But this was a really well thought out restoration project, and there's no conflict with beavers and homeowners in this area for the most part. And if we go back and look at the original images here, this is 2021 on the left, and this is 2000, I think this is the 2009 image on the right. And you can just see the amount of water differences. It's quite amazing. So that's that conflict of interest, and that's that conflict, you know, if you go to a restaurant and the food's good, you're going to go back. If it's bad, you're going to probably complain and not go back. And that's kind of the lived perception, and the lived experiences are very important when it comes to beaver coexistence. So moving on to the next thing is, what are the public's preferred coexistence strategies for managing urban beavers? And we saw the knowledge levels play not a significant factor. So again, this is just a straight asking, you know, Tim, Bob, and Jerry what they think about all of this. So what are their preferred coexistence strategies for managing urban beaver by populations? And how do they vary by social and spatial variables? So age, how far they live from the watercourse or the site. So these are our management options. And one thing we decided to do is, when I was at BeaverCon, I asked people about coexistence and defining that. One person told me that they thought coexistence was basically not killing beavers during the breeding season and after they've had their young, but you know, if they cull them after that, then that's considered coexistence. So lots of wide variety. Some people said anything but killing is coexistence, but I wanted to take a more nuanced approach. So these are our strict definitions of coexistence. We didn't give people these definitions in the survey. We just gave them all the management options as management options. So they didn't get to pick coexistence versus non-coexistence, just to be clear. We didn't want to put that in there for them. But education to address misinformation, coexistence, payment to landowners to host beavers, which a lot of you are familiar with, compensation for losses resulting in beaver activity, flow devices, you very familiar, tree protection, crop protection, discouraging burrowing, which is more of a Eurasian beaver problem, but North American ones still do it. And then non-coexistence strategies for us were pulling back land use. So that Fano Creek one, where they just said, you can't use this area, it's all beaver land now, that's not coexistence in our definition. Population control by moving beavers. It works if you're experienced. We don't have a relocation program here in Oregon, so we didn't really think that as a coexistence strategy. Sterilization, lethal trapping, and then the last but not least is just do nothing. Just let the beavers be beavers, and that's not coexistence for us either, especially in these urban settings. So if we define that and we scaled it up, we're looking at this information right here. So misinformation and education, 100%. That's what people supported the most, which is a coexistence strategy. And then if we look at protecting trees, that was the next highest one. Payment for landowners, that was the next one, for payment for people to host beavers on their land. And then if we look into the least favored coexistence and non-coexistence strategies, we see killing and doing nothing. Even doing nothing even got less support than killing the beaver. So people want action. They want something to be done. They just don't want you to do nothing as a land manager. So we decided to try to find some significance in this. Okay, how do their social demographics play into this? And there's a lot going on here. I understand that. The main thing to focus is that dashed line on the left-hand side. That is our p-value. So anything to the left of that is significant. So we're going to try to block that out of the way. And what we see is political views. And you can see they are both present in the coexistence and non-coexistence as a significant variable. Conservatives support discouraging of burrowing and support of lethal management. So people who are more conservative in their political views have a significant impact on both coexistence and non-coexistence strategies. Women are more supportive of relocation. Higher education correlated with support of relocation again. And I just think people don't understand that it can be successful, but it's not that successful here in Oregon, to my understanding, and this could have changed since this has been done. And then older respondents were less likely to believe beavers required no management. So that was our social demographics. And I didn't make count of the number of significance, but you can see when we're looking at the spatial ones, there's only 2, whereas the other one, I think there was maybe 4 or 5. So right then and there, we're looking at the social demographics play a larger significant role in management practices than our spatial demographics, which those who live closer to the watercourse are more supportive of education and misinformation initiatives, and those who live closer to a particular green space are more supportive for compensation of damages caused by beavers. And what you can see here is spatially significant coexistence, nothing for non-coexistence. So there's less of a role there in that spatial variable. More social demographic variables have significant management preferences when compared to spatial variables. And this is everything I just said. So we're going to enjoy that little piece of artwork, and then we're going to skip by it. Okay, so our discussion key takeaways: ecological knowledge correlates with higher support coexistence. True. Significant? No. General public sentiment supports legal protection. This is true. Key influencing factors of coexistence are political views, education level, proximity to water, age, gender. Those are just a few that we had just pointed out. Doing no management is the least preferred method. Plain and simple. Policy implications. I mean, aligning laws with public preferences for non-lethal management strategies is a good thing. The Martinez Beaver group in Martinez, California, you know, they had that big uproar when they wanted to give the cleaver to the beaver when beavers were living in downtown, and now they do a very successful beaver celebration every year. I went to middle school in Martinez, oddly enough. So what they're doing there is just a great example of how public preference can kind of shape policy on urban beavers. Public outreach and efforts, I think workshop signage and hands-on restoration projects have more leniency than just handing out pamphlets. I think that lived experience with beavers plays a more significant role in helping people view them positively than just having, you know, maybe a negative encounter they've experienced on their own. Adaptive management policies that integrate urban planning with beaver conservation and maintenance. Beavers will show up, so you need to keep them in mind in areas they are present for restoration efforts or building a park or something, because they can go in there and really change the landscape, as we know, and that could be negative, like we've seen in Fannel Creek. Public perception is generally positive, but management preferences vary. Social variables play a role, a more significant role in coexistence than spatial variables. Targeted education and adaptive policies are needed to foster coexistence. And then urban beaver management must balance the ecological benefits of beavers and what they provide in an urban area with human concerns. Like, we are human and we do have those concerns, and it's important to find that balance between those two things. Whoops. Did it go back? Oh, it did. That's great. Limitations in future research. These are self-reported responses, so they may reflect biases or knowledge gaps. We had very limited responses from the Tualatin River National Wildlife Refuge. I think only 10, because of just the rules and regulations they had about posting signage. Sample size of only 176 after we took out people who didn't finish the survey, which is part of the requirement. They had to be 18 or older. Future research could be longitudinal studies on evolving public perceptions, either with or without increased beaver activity, expanding the geographic scope, looking at responses based on location, e.g., I could break this down into Fannel Creek versus Springville Creek and really dive into more of that, you know, 1 versus 1, and just take Tualatin River National Wildlife River out. And then cities that have planned for beavers versus cities that have not. Seattle has done a great job at planning for beavers in some of their parks, thinking, let's build this park and beavers are going to come, so how can we facilitate them being here and coexistence? Acknowledgements, the UPP, which is a program through USGS and PSU. They do a lot of funding of students, and this research project, which was partially funded by the USGS. Tualatin Soil and Water Conservation District, they were the main funders of this project, and we really appreciate their continued support for looking at things like this. Portland State University, you know, they gave me a chance to get my bachelor's and my master's, and I couldn't be more thankful for everything that they've done for me personally. My advisor, I hear horror stories about advisors, but Hee-Jun Chung, amazing. Every week a meeting, you know, no matter what. Really great to work with. I highly recommend it if you know anybody looking to do a graduate program or a PhD program. He is an excellent advisor. Personal thanks to the PSU CAD lab, which had CADE lab, which helped me do some of the statistical analysis. My lab colleagues were hugely helpful. Miles, who I just kind of hang out with and ride bikes with, gives me that mental break. Michael, who distributed the survey, who helped design the survey before he transitioned to something else. I transitioned into this slot. My cycling team, because without that, I'd probably go absolutely crazy. And then a picture of my partner, Kendra Ritchie here, who's a wildlife biologist. This is us hiking in New Zealand above the tree line with all these geothermal pools. She's been extremely supportive in this going back to school effort in my late 30s, and I probably would not be able to do this without her. So her support is greatly appreciated. And then I think that's it. Hopefully I didn't take too much time. And any questions, I'd be happy to answer. Yeah. And I'm just going to stop sharing my screen, I think. Thanks.
Awesome. Thanks, Matt. Really appreciate it. Yeah, that's terrific. So we do have some questions. So I can unmute people. It might just take me a second. So if you raise your hand, I can go ahead and unmute you. We had a couple people already post some questions in the chat. So I can, let's see, there's Kina. Can I unmute you and even see if this works? There we go. I guess you can't.
Hi there.
Hey, there you are.
I don't know if you can see me or not, but no.
We can
Okay.
hear you.
All right, perfect. So just a few questions. I was wondering for the House bill that came about last year, who the responsible parties were that brought that forward and or coalitions. And then also at Fannel Creek, what the discussion might have been around sort of allowing the trail system to stay in place and use maybe like pond leveler systems or something like that to allow the water to flow, but the beaver to stay, as well as, you know, trails and recreation to continue.
So for the House bill, Pam Marsh, Michael Dembrow, Jeff Gold, Jeff, Jeffrey Golden, I think. Those were all big supporters, and the bill had several like co-sponsors. Um, I can't name all of their names, but there were a lot of people behind the Beaver bill to get that passed. And I also know like OSU was working on a bunch of new Beaver Bill stuff. You know, I've met with some people from Federal Fish and Wildlife here in Oregon, and they were working on stuff for the Beaver Bill. I don't know too much about it. That really isn't my cup of tea, but it was something that was pushed forth last year, and it was passed pretty easily. Oregon does have a past of taking this trapping of beavers and culling of beavers and going back and forth. There were years at a time where there was no trapping allowed or killing allowed, and then beaver population shot up, and then they brought the bill back to allow it. So there's been an ebb and flow over the last many years with this beaver fur bearer predator situation. The Fano Creek, you know, it gets really complicated when you're in an urban area because you have the waterways are managed by an agency, the park is managed by an agency, the area that water flows into is managed by a different agency. So I really think it's hard for all of these agencies to kind of come together and come up with a solution. And furthermore, you know, the Beaver Institute, they do have that beaver working program with they train people to put in pond levelers. And out here on the West Coast, Portland, I know most of, there's not a lot of people who do that work. And a lot of these cities and counties agencies, they don't do that work in-house either. They contract it out to somebody, and there's no one living locally that does that work. And if they do, it's probably not well known by these agencies that that is an option that you can put in a pond leveler and get the results that we've seen at BeaverCon, that we've seen on the East Coast. So yeah, that's probably the biggest thing when it comes to Fano Creek, is just letting the beavers take over. And it could be that same trope that you hear. You tear the dam down and the beavers are busy building it all night, and they put it right back again. So the city could have just been tired, or Tualatin Parks or Clean Water Services or any of those agencies who manage that area, you know, just thought maybe this would be the way. It'd be easier to move the Frisbee disc golf course and figure it out from there. So I hope that answers your question. I'm sorry.
Thank you so much, Matt. I really appreciate
Yeah.
it.
And that was the same question in the Q&A by Steve Merkley.
Okay.
So I don't think there was any
Here, I'll
of the residents. Yeah, go
unmute
ahead. Go ahead,
Steve
Brian.
just in case. Steve, if you had any follow-up, you can just chime in if you're satisfied.
No, I am satisfied, but I have another question if that's okay.
Yeah.
Um, I'm really curious to see how your results of like the positive, how people perceive beavers, the positive nature of it compares to the UK study where they found like, I don't think it was like 85 or 90% of people were supportive of beaver reintroductions and returns. I want to know how, yours kind of compares to that study.
You know, we had many questions. And again, our survey was based off of that survey that was done in the UK. And we had some questions that were the same. And, you know, I have that statistic that shows beaver reintroduction support. Um, we just decided not to include it in this survey because we wanted to focus on those social and ecological perceptions and how they vary across space. But I can tell you just from having those stats, it is just like legal protections. It's overwhelmingly positive for beaver reintroductions. The thing is, we don't really need beaver reintroductions where we are here in Portland or even in Oregon because we have a lot of beavers here.
Hmm.
And they are just like coming back. And with this new beaver bill and the limited um, killing that can be done, like the beaver population is expected to grow. I think one person said something really interesting in the survey was, if we're going to go through the trouble of reintroducing them, then they need to be legally protected, because what's the point of reintroducing something and then someone just goes and shoots it, right?
Yeah.
So but yeah, overwhelmingly positive for beaver reintroduction and beaver protection um, in this particular demographic in outside of Portland, Oregon, again, which is highly educated, liberal. I mean, another stat we didn't put in, it was 80, oh God, maybe even higher, 92% 92% white. The majority of the people who took the survey made over $100,000 annually, whether that's combined or not. We didn't ask, but it is a rich, white, affluent, liberal area who took the survey. So
Yeah.
we do acknowledge that. But yeah, overwhelmingly positive.
All right. Thanks for sharing that.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I guess, sorry, I'm gonna undo Kina again.
Great, thank you. Matt, sorry if I missed this at the beginning of your talk about the idea related to like social aspects of Beaver. And I gather that it's about human health and well-being and human perception, and then like sort of positive, I guess, mental health benefits. And I'm just curious um, where this kind of theory or these ideas come about and who either, I guess, in the academic sphere or the praxis realm are kind of looking at these things and trying to draw those connections because that obviously formulated somehow the sort of foundational aspects of your research.
Yeah. So when we decided to make this survey, my colleague Michael, who's getting his PhD now, he's the one who reached out to Dr. Alster in the UK and came up with some of the questions. And him and my advisor, Shijun, worked on this. And that was one of the major things when I stepped into this project that they wanted to highlight was how beavers affect things on a social level. And I think it comes down to like some of the theories they talked about was like, let me see if my list has that on here, like nature-based solutions. Some of the studies in the UK did look at social agents of change and how beavers affect things on a social level. So we just wanted to kind of highlight that instance that there's just so much more unknown on how beavers affect things socially, because in these urban environments, it's not just all about ecology, which is what a lot of papers and studies look at. We wanted to look at sociology and the human impact, because it could be very stressful to have beavers chewing down your favorite trees, or recreation and leisure. You know, we've seen studies that talk about beaver ponds and not including fish passages, and it's a barrier for fish, but we know that's not really that true in a lot of cases. So we just really wanted to highlight the unknown, and also maybe there's a lot of studies that could be done to kind of further look into how beavers affect things on a social level. So in some ways it's kind of a novel idea, but they did do their research to kind of cherry pick a lot of these questions out. And I'm happy to send you an email, Kina, and get back to you on that. If I speak to my advisor, maybe he can give me some more ideas of why they chose those questions. But just based on our survey results, that's kind of how we decided to queue things up, as ecologically and socially.
That's great. Thank you so very much.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to comment too that I'm an architect and landscape designer, and in my work with my colleagues and just the general sphere of sort of design practice that's geared towards sort of um, bridging ecological design aspects with sociocultural and recreational goals. There are some projects that I'm happy to share out that are kind of integrating restoration with beaver habitat, trail systems, and also converting formerly polluted like brownfield sites into restored sites. So it's kind of cool just that that's happening more
Yeah.
extensively around the world and in the US. But I'm not seeing that so much here in the Pacific Northwest, like you mentioned, Matt, in the
Yeah.
same, with the same sort of layering and bringing together these complex themes and, oftentimes initially themes or interests that are misaligned but become more aligned over time as they're working together.
Yeah, and something that's interesting when it comes to that recreation and leisure is, you know, people like to see beavers and they're not seeing that often, which we had talked about. And like that level of tourism of, having an experience where you get to see a beaver, people want that experience. People pay for those experiences. And it's a great tool for nonprofits, like we have Bark here, we have Tualatin River National, we have, what is it? God, the Tualatin Watershed Council, for them to kind of have those workshops where people get to experience the beaver and see the beaver in an urban area. People really like having those experiences. And Kina, if you're not familiar with the project in Seattle that they did with the beaver integration into a redesign of a park, you should look into that. It's a really, really good example of how that can be done.
Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
So just for people have to jump off, in the chat, and Adam's going to leave, so I'm going to plug this for him. There is a very short survey, 45-second poll to take for the Beaver Institute's developing of the National American Beaver Network. Did I get that right? Yes. So it's in the chat, if you've got a minute, not even a minute, if you have 45 seconds, go to that. Okay, so now, sorry there. Oh, go ahead, Adam. Did you want to?
Oh, just thank you. And I timed it. It's 45 seconds or less. So it doesn't take up even a minute of your day. So thank you.
So if anyone else has questions, you can raise your hand and I'll get to you. Yeah, so there is a question. Who did the artwork?
I did.
Oh,
I did
nice.
the artwork using who knows, an old version of ChatGPT, so if I had to hire someone to do that, there's no way I could do that on my own. And I get a lot of comments about the artwork. People are like, well, I've never seen artwork done like that with ChatGPT, like sketch wise. And it's like, well, you manipulate thing enough, you kind of figure it out. So yeah, so I had ChatGPT do all of the little artwork and things like that for me.
I had I mean, I know, right, it's master's. Do you know of studies or do you have even preliminary data of somebody who's looked at kind of perspectives either before a project went in and then, afterwards to see, if some of these successful restoration projects or even kind of coexistence projects have changed perceptions?
I haven't seen any studies that look at an instance where there was a public survey taken before a project went in and a public survey taken after a project went in. I think public surveys are highly undervalued and underused in a lot of things like this, and a common misconception is if as a land manager, if they know what I know, then they'll act like how I act. And that's never the case because people's lived experiences are so vast and different. You can't assume that. And I just think for people who use the area and recreate in those areas, how they do that and what they think, I think is very, very important. Obviously, I have some bias doing social survey, but I think a lot of these agencies, they're armchair experts. They don't interact with the area. Maybe they don't use the area, and they're just doing what they think is best on paper or based on research and not really getting boots on the ground, which obviously takes time, money, and resources. And I understand that, but there's nothing that I know that does that because for me, my knowledge of beaver specific restoration projects that aren't just like BDAs and public perception is very limited. We have the UK. Specifically for beavers, there's some surveys in Italy that were done about public perceptions of beavers in urban spaces. Obviously, Scotland, they have some too, and maybe they'll come out with some as, England, they got that beaver down there outside of London. And maybe they have some surveys to kind of talk about that, but that's a very different situation. That is a beaver contained in almost not, I don't want to say like a zoo-like setting, but it is contained. It cannot get out. Whereas what we're dealing with are just beaver showing up.
Cool. Yeah, I guess maybe I kind of anticipated that was the answer, but yeah, I'd love to see something like that, especially if you have a project and people are actually exposed to it and see it happening, you'd have more informed people.
Yeah, totally. One thing I wish we had on this survey is an actionable question, like how willing are you to participate in planting trees, doing a local restoration project that gives beavers food or something like that. I wish we had that question because that would have been great to know if their knowledge of beavers affects whether they will be involved and all these other social and spatial demographics, if they'd be physically willing involved to do something, not just obviously everyone wants information. It's a cop out. Of course we want information. It's easy. I can take it or leave it, but I have it. So it'd be nice to have an actionable question like that in a future survey.
Great for getting other projects off the ground too. Okay, I'll let Sandra talk, but yeah, I'd also love to see what the perspectives are of the regulators who actually permit these projects.
There are quite a bit of surveys in Europe. I think there's another urban wildlife survey, again, down in Germany that looks at professionals, not public. So some of those surveys do exist in the world.
I was just wondering if you have any predictions given your research results. Now that there's this beaver bill and you have to choose coexistence measures first, do you think there's going to become more, like you're going to see a decrease in acceptance of beavers as there's more and more beavers people are interacting with because they have to? Or do you think it's going to be a positive? Just given what you said that people don't know how to put in pond levelers and things like this. So are they creating a situation where you're just going to create conflict now between beavers and humans?
You know, that's tough to answer. I would say that it is all about those management practices or lack thereof. Um, there's some people don't even know about management practices, you know, and some agencies that manage these problems don't know about management practices either. The city of Portland, I believe they do have like this really beautiful complex flow chart. Is a beaver present? Yes, no, and you kind of work your way through this maze of answers and scenarios. But I can't say if it's going to be more or less bad because I personally think a lot of these conflicts are not in urban areas as much as they are on private land, farming land and things like that, where a lot of those people can just go out and take care of the beaver the only way that they know how, which is, you know, typically shoot it. We do have some local champions of beavers and farmers here. The Tualatin Watershed Council, they do a lot of beaver conflict resolution work. They do put in pond levelers. And what they do is they try to end the quote